Emma had never imagined that the word home could hurt this much. It used to mean the little yellow house with the crooked fence where her twins laughed on the front lawn. Now it meant a worn-out duffel bag, a crowded shelter, and a plastic bin with their names written in marker. She sat on the narrow cot, listening to the hum of traffic outside the shelter window. The city felt colder than usual, even for late autumn. Her fingers were numb, not from the weather, but from the exhaustion of begging for another chance. All she wanted was a door to lock at night, a kitchen to cook in, a place where her kids could hang drawings on the wall again. Instead, she had a promise to herself and a heart that refused to give up. The shelter worker had mentioned a community dinner downtown, some charity event where important people would be. Emma wasn't sure why she'd kept the little flyer. Maybe it was because of the word opportunity written in bold near the bottom. It felt like a cruel joke at first, like telling someone who hadn't eaten in days to come watch a buffet. But the more she stared at it, the more it started to feel like a door, even if it was barely open. She folded it carefully and tucked it into her pocket, as if it were something fragile. The twins, Noah and Lily, slept side by side, cheeks pressed together, sharing one thin blanket. Emma watched their tiny chests rise and fall and made a decision. She would go, even if she had to stand in the back and pretend she belonged. It had been 6 months since everything fell apart. 6 months since the company she worked for downsized and called her into a small office with apologetic smiles. 6 months since the savings disappeared into bills, and then the landlord's patience disappeared too. She had tried everything from temporary jobs to late-night cleaning shifts, but nothing stuck long enough to rebuild. Friends who once said, "If you ever need anything, just call," suddenly stopped answering. Her parents lived 2 provinces away and barely got by themselves. Every time she thought she was starting to climb, the ground shifted under her feet again. The shelter was supposed to be temporary, but temporary had a way of stretching itself into something permanent and heavy. On the other side of the city, in a glass tower that touched the clouds, Gabriel Moreau stared out at the skyline. To most of the world, he was simply Moreau, the billionaire who built half the developments in the downtown core. People talked about him like an idea, not a person. They spoke of his ruthlessness, his business instincts, his ability to turn vacant lots into shimmering towers. Very few ever mentioned the widowed father who rarely slept more than a few hours at a time. Fewer still knew about the quiet panic that gripped him when he thought about his children growing up without a real family. Money had filled his calendars, his buildings, his closets, but it had never filled the silence at the dinner table. His assistant, Julia, stepped into his office with her usual calm efficiency. She placed a folder on his desk, the corner of a colorful flyer peeking out. "The foundation dinner is tonight at the community center," she reminded him. "We're highlighting the new housing initiative. It would be good for you to say a few words. A lot of families are counting on this." Gabriel glanced at the flyer without much interest at first. He'd approved the budget, signed the papers, posed with the architect. To him it was another project, another line in a long list of giving back. But something about the photo on the flyer caught his eye. A pair of small hands holding a cardboard sign that simply said, "We just want a home." His throat tightened unexpectedly. He had grown up far from luxury. There had been nights when his mother pretended she'd already eaten so he could have the last piece of toast. He remembered the sinking feeling of watching neighbors move into better places while his family stayed stuck. That memory never really left him, even when the first millions started to roll in. He told himself that his housing projects were a way of honoring those difficult years, of easing that old ache. Still, somewhere along the way, the numbers had taken over. Profit margins, investor calls, press releases, all of it stacked so high that the faces at the bottom blurred. The flyer on his desk sharpened them again. He sighed and nodded to Julia. "Fine. I'll be there. Make sure the driver knows the route." Emma stood in front of the shelter's cracked mirror, trying to fix her hair with fingers that trembled. She had one decent blouse left, a pale blue one that used to be her favorite. Now it was slightly faded, but it was clean, and that was something. She dabbed a touch of lip balm on, more out of habit than vanity. Her eyes looked older than her 32 years, framed by dark circles that no amount of sleep seemed able to erase. Still, when Noah and Lily tugged at her sleeve and called her pretty, she believed them, at least for a moment. She straightened her shoulders, even though her knees felt weak. Tonight wasn't about impressing anyone, it was about being seen at all. The community center buzzed with movement and murmured conversation. Volunteers carried trays of food, arranging them carefully on long tables. The smell of roasted vegetables and warm bread drifted through the air, making Emma's stomach twist with both hunger and guilt. She hadn't come here to take advantage, she kept reminding herself of that. This event, the flyer said, was for families like hers, for people on waiting lists and between doors. Her kids clung to her hands, eyes wide at the sight of bright banners and balloons. For them, it was an adventure, a break from the gray walls of the shelter. For Emma, it was a test she didn't know how to pass. She kept her steps small, unsure where to stand. She registered their names at a folding table where a kind-faced volunteer smiled and handed the twins stickers. "You're on the list," the woman said. "There's a children's corner over there with crafts, if they'd like." Emma hesitated, the instinct to keep her kids close flaring up. Then she saw the play area, a fenced-off corner with books, crayons, and 2 early childhood workers kneeling on the floor. It looked safe, watched, warm. Noah spotted a stack of toy cars, and Lily noticed a table covered in glittery paper. "Mom, can we?" they asked in unison. Emma nodded slowly and walked them over, kneeling to explain they'd stay within sight. As they ran off, her hands felt strangely empty. She drifted toward the back of the room, where the lighting wasn't as bright and no one seemed to notice her. People in suits chatted near the stage, laughing lightly, balancing plates of food they barely ate. She caught snippets of conversation about partnerships and tax credits, about doing good in efficient ways. It was like listening to another language. She didn't resent them, exactly, she just felt like a ghost passing through someone else's world. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to appear smaller. A part of her wanted to slip out the side door and walk back to the shelter, to the familiar ache she knew how to carry. Another part, tiny but stubborn, told her to stay. Gabriel arrived with the quiet disruption that followed powerful people. Heads turned, conversations softened, phones were subtly tucked away. He hated that part, the way a room shifted to accommodate his presence. Still, he moved through it with practiced ease, shaking hands, exchanging polite words with community leaders and local officials. Julia stayed close enough to whisper names and details when needed. The mayor thanked him publicly for his contributions, joking that if Gabriel decided to run for office, they'd all be in trouble. The crowd laughed, and Gabriel responded with a tight, professional smile. Inside, he felt oddly detached, watching himself perform a role he'd rehearsed for years. When it was time for his speech, he walked up to the small stage, the wooden steps creaking under his polished shoes. He stood behind the simple podium, different from the glossy ones at corporate events. The microphone squeaked once, then settled. Rows of faces looked up at him, volunteers, donors, city officials, and scattered among them, families sitting a little straighter, as if this moment might decide something important. Gabriel glanced at his prepared notes, then at the children's corner where a girl with braids and a boy with mismatched socks were giggling over a paper crown. His heart tugged unexpectedly. Without fully understanding why, he folded the notes and slipped them into his pocket. "My name is Gabriel Moreau," he began, his voice steady but softer than usual. "Most people know me because of buildings. Towers, condos, renovations, all of that. They see the glass and steel and think that's what I'm about." He paused, letting his gaze move slowly across the room. "But what matters to me isn't the height of the buildings. It's what happens inside them. It's the families who sleep without fear, the kids who can invite friends over, the parents who know their rent won't suddenly double." A murmur of attention settled over the crowd. Emma felt herself leaning forward slightly, surprised to hear sincerity instead of polished phrasing. He continued, setting aside the language of percentages and forecasts. "I grew up in a one-bedroom apartment with a single mom who worked 2 jobs. I know what it's like when the word home feels temporary. I know how heavy keys can be when you're not sure how long they'll work in the lock." His throat tightened, but he pushed through. Tonight isn't about charity. It's about responsibility. People like me have the means to change what neighborhoods look like, who gets to stay, and who gets pushed out. So we're starting a new initiative. Not just emergency housing, but real homes, with long-term leases and support services, prioritizing families who need the most. A quiet ripple passed through the room. Emma felt her heart beating faster, as if someone had cracked a window in a stuffy room. Real homes. Long-term leases. The word sounded almost dangerous, too hopeful to touch. She glanced instinctively toward the children's corner and saw Noah proudly holding up a crooked paper crown, searching the room for her. She smiled and waved, blinking away sudden tears. She wanted to believe what this man was saying. She wanted to believe that someone with power actually understood what it meant to be standing on the edge like this. But life had taught her to be careful with hope. It could sting worse than any disappointment when it slipped away again. Gabriel finished his speech to steady applause, then stepped down from the stage feeling strangely exposed. Public speaking rarely affected him, but tonight his words had come from a place he kept carefully guarded. Julia gave him an approving nod, already thinking ahead to interviews and press follow-ups. He brushed it off with a small gesture, his eyes drifting back toward the families near the rear of the room. There was something about the woman he'd noticed earlier, standing close to the wall, that kept tugging at his attention. She wasn't dressed like the donors or volunteers, yet she carried herself with a quiet dignity that set her apart. Her gaze had followed every word he spoke, not with admiration, but with cautious hunger, as if she were weighing whether to trust what she heard. He told himself he was imagining it, yet found his feet moving slowly in her direction. Emma watched the tall man approach, her chest tightening with a strange mix of nerves and disbelief. She hadn't expected this evening to involve any personal interaction, certainly not with the billionaire sponsor of the event. Her instinct was to look away, to avoid bringing further attention to herself, but something made her hold his gaze. His suit was impeccably tailored, his posture confident, yet his eyes looked tired in a deeply human way. This wasn't the distant, untouchable expression she had imagined. When he stopped a few feet away, she felt suddenly aware of her worn shoes and the faint crease in her blouse. Still, she kept her shoulders square. She had already spent too much of her life shrinking for others' comfort. "Hi," Gabriel said, his voice lower without the microphone's projection. "I hope you're finding the event helpful." He gestured vaguely to the bustling room, the children's corner, the food tables. It sounded like a standard politeness, but his eyes remained fixed on her face, searching. Emma nodded, unsure how much honesty was appropriate in this moment. "It's nice for the kids," she answered simply. "They don't get out to things like this much." He followed her glance to the craft area where Noah and Lily were now comparing stickers with other children. "Are those yours?" he asked. "They are," Emma replied. "Twins." Despite herself, her voice warmed when she spoke about them. Gabriel felt something shift inside his chest at the way she said that one word. Twins. He thought of his own children waiting at home with their nanny, well cared for yet aching for something money couldn't buy. "They look like they're having a good time," he said. "What are their names?" "Noah and Lily," she answered. "I'm Emma." He extended his hand automatically, then hesitated when he saw her eyes flick briefly to the calluses on her own palms, as if embarrassed to shake a billionaire's hand. She did it anyway, her grip firm, and the simple contact felt more grounding than any formal meeting had in years. "I'm Gabriel," he said, though he knew she probably already knew that. For a moment they stood in awkward silence, surrounded by noise that felt suddenly far away. Emma wondered if she should thank him for the initiative, for the speech, for existing in a way that offered even a sliver of hope. The words tangled in her throat. Gratitude, after all, could quickly start sounding like obligation, and she had nothing left she could afford to owe. Gabriel, sensing the tension, spoke first. "Are you currently on a housing list?" he asked gently, careful not to sound intrusive. Emma nodded. "We have been for months. It's slow." She tried to keep bitterness out of her tone, but it slipped through anyway. "I'm doing everything they ask. Paperwork, interviews, check-ins. It just takes time I don't seem to have." Her eyes briefly flicked back to her children, a silent reminder of the stakes. He inhaled slowly. This was no abstract issue now. This was a mother with real faces behind her words. "If you're comfortable," he said, "I'd like to connect you with our foundation coordinator tonight. At the very least, we can make sure your file is part of the first review group." Emma stiffened, a protective reflex rising. Offers often came with complications she hadn't anticipated. Programs promised more than they delivered. Still, something in his manner felt different, less transactional. "That would be appreciated," she said carefully. He gave a small nod of relief, as if he'd been hoping she wouldn't refuse outright. Julia was already stepping closer, notebook in hand, when Gabriel waved her over with a quick motion. They moved to a quieter corner near the side entrance, away from the loudest chatter. The foundation coordinator, a middle-aged woman named Denise, joined them, asking Emma respectful, practical questions. Dates, number of children, current living situation. Emma answered steadily, feeling the strange weight of being truly listened to. Gabriel stayed nearby instead of disappearing once the introductions were done. He watched as Emma described the shelter schedule, how the twins had to wake before dawn to make the school bus connection, how homework was done on a shared table under flickering fluorescent lights. He saw her jaw tighten when she mentioned the fear of having to move even farther away if space ran out. This was the raw reality behind the statistics he saw every day. Denise finally closed her notebook. "We can start an expedited review tomorrow," she said. "No guarantees, but your situation will be prioritized." Emma nodded, gratitude and exhaustion colliding in her chest until her eyes stung again. "Thank you," she whispered, more to the room than any single person. Denise excused herself to handle another family, leaving Gabriel and Emma alone once more. He hesitated, unsure how to bridge the personal space between them now that business had been handled. "I'm glad you came tonight," he said finally. "Sometimes people who need help the most don't feel welcome at these events." Emma gave a faint, almost apologetic smile. "Most of the time, we don't feel welcome anywhere." That honest reply hit him harder than he expected. He searched for something meaningful to say and came up short. "I know this may sound strange," Gabriel said slowly, "but meeting you reminded me why I started doing any of this in the first place." Emma studied him, trying to read the truth behind the words. All she saw was a weariness that matched her own more than she would have imagined possible from someone like him. For the first time that evening, she felt less like a guest and more like a person standing face to face with another flawed human being. The thought unsettled her, because it made it easier to trust, and she wasn't sure she was ready to do that again. They walked together toward the children's corner, where Noah had constructed an elaborate tower from cardboard tubes and Lily was decorating the sides with marker hearts. Both children looked up excitedly when they saw Emma return. "Mom, look what we made!" Lily exclaimed, dragging her over proudly. Emma crouched beside them, praising their work, temporarily forgetting the elegant man standing just behind her. Gabriel watched the scene quietly, struck by how natural she was with them, how easily her stress melted in their presence. He imagined his own children laughing freely like this, without the structured schedules and silent luxury that defined their world. An unexpected ache bloomed in his chest. The caregiver supervising the corner smiled at Gabriel. "You have great kids," she said casually, assuming he was the father. Emma froze slightly, ready to correct the assumption, but before she could speak, Gabriel answered gently, "They're hers. They did an amazing job, though, didn't they?" The caregiver nodded and returned to helping another child. Emma glanced up at Gabriel, surprised but grateful for his understated correction. Their eyes met again, something unspoken lingering between them. For a brief instant, neither spoke, the moment stretching with a fragile intimacy neither had anticipated. As the event began to wind down, families gathered belongings and lined up to collect leftover food packages. Emma knelt to zip the twins into their jackets, her motions careful and practiced. She could feel Gabriel watching but didn't look back until the children were ready to leave. He cleared his throat softly. "Emma," he said, catching her attention, I don't want to put pressure on you, but if you ever need to talk, or if things start feeling overwhelming, here's my direct contact through the foundation." He handed her a simple card, no flashy logos, just a name and number. She took it, surprised by its weight. "Thank you," she replied, unsure what else to say. Contact with someone like him felt unreal, like holding a bridge made of paper. Outside, the night air cut sharp and clean against her cheeks. She hugged the twins close as they waited for the shelter shuttle. Through the glass doors, she could still see Gabriel standing inside, hands in his pockets, watching families depart one by one. Their eyes met again across the barrier, and he gave a small, almost shy nod. Emma returned it instinctively. She climbed onto the bus with her children, finding seats near the back. As it pulled away, she clutched the card in her hand, not as a guarantee, but as something new and frightening, a possibility. Gabriel remained by the entrance long after the room emptied. Julia approached, ready to usher him toward the car waiting outside, but he stayed still, his gaze fixed on the street where the shuttle's taillights had disappeared. He felt unsettled in a way he couldn't fully understand. Meeting Emma hadn't solved anything, and yet it had shifted something deep within him. The foundation initiative, the housing program, his wealth, it all suddenly seemed tied to the faces of two children with paper crowns and a mother fighting not to fall apart. He exhaled slowly, realizing that this encounter had reached beyond sympathy into something personal. And though he didn't yet know how or why, Gabriel sensed that crossing paths with Emma and her children was not a moment that would simply fade away. The following weeks moved forward in a strange blur for Emma. Days still began before sunrise, the shelter alarm rattling everyone awake, the twins bundled into jackets that were always slightly too thin for the morning chill. She still packed their lunches from donated food and double-checked homework under the dim lights of a shared table. On the surface, nothing had changed. Yet in her pocket, tucked next to the crumpled transit passes, Gabriel's card remained perfectly smooth, untouched by time. She hadn't called the number. Part of her feared that doing so would somehow make the fragile connection feel less real, or worse, open a door that would never truly lead anywhere. Denise from the foundation did reach out, though, just as promised. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon while Emma was helping organize donated clothing in exchange for a few extra meal credits. Denise's voice was upbeat but cautious. Their file was under review, she explained, and the process might still take several weeks. There were inspections, background checks, lease alignments. Nothing was certain yet. Emma thanked her and hung up, forcing herself not to build castles out of words like review and priority. Still, when she picked the twins up from school that day, she found herself smiling more easily, as if she were finally carrying less weight alone. Gabriel, meanwhile, couldn't shake the image of the small family from his mind. The memory followed him into boardrooms and onto private elevator rides. During investor meetings, while discussing development timelines and returns, he kept drifting back to Emma's voice describing early bus rides and flickering lights. He began to read foundation case summaries with new attention, requesting more detailed reports instead of quick overviews. Julia noticed the shift almost immediately. "You've been unusually focused on the housing files lately," she remarked one afternoon. Gabriel only nodded. "I think I lost sight of the people behind the paperwork," he replied. "I don't want that to happen again." At home, the imbalance in his life became harder to ignore. His children, 8-year-old Sophie and 10-year-old Lucas, lived in a world of tutors, chauffeurs, and structured playdates. They were polite, intelligent, and profoundly lonely. Dinners often unfolded in near silence, the three of them eating at a table large enough for a dozen guests. That night, Sophie poked at her food and looked up at him. "Dad, you don't smile much anymore," she said quietly. Lucas nodded in agreement. The comment struck deeper than any criticism ever had. Gabriel managed a faint smile and promised they would spend the weekend together, just the three of them, no work interruptions. Inside, he wondered if promises were enough. On a cold Thursday evening, Emma finally gathered the courage to dial the number on the card. She waited until the twins were asleep, their faces pressed into mismatched pillows in the shared family room. Her hands shook as she listened to the ringing. Gabriel answered himself, his voice worn but attentive. "This is Gabriel," he said. She almost hung up before speaking. "It's Emma," she managed. There was a brief pause, followed by a gentle warmth in his tone. "I'm really glad you called." They spoke longer than either had intended. Emma described the slow waiting, her worry about the shelter reducing available family spaces, the quiet exhaustion that never quite left her bones. Gabriel listened without interrupting, offering no empty reassurances, only empathy. He told her about his children, about the ache of feeling present yet distant in their lives. To Emma's surprise, she felt comfortable enough to laugh softly at small shared frustrations, missed buses, stubborn kids, and the universal chaos of parenthood. When the call ended, both sat silently for a moment in their separate worlds, struck by how healing that simple conversation had felt. From that point forward, the calls became occasional but meaningful. No constant messaging or dramatic declarations, just genuine check-ins that gradually chipped away at both of their loneliness. Emma never asked for special treatment or favors, and Gabriel never hinted at providing any. Instead, they talked about hopes, fears, and the complicated paths that had led them where they stood. Their connection remained built not on need, but on understanding. 2 weeks later, Denise called again, this time with a brighter urgency. "We have a unit opening," she said. 2-bedroom townhouse. It's near a school and a park. The review committee approved your application. Emma dropped into the closest chair, breath catching in her chest. For a moment she couldn't speak. "Are you serious?" she whispered. Denise confirmed the details quickly, explaining move-in schedules and paperwork timelines, but Emma barely heard beyond the words approved and opening. When the call ended, she pressed both hands to her face and cried quietly until her chest stopped aching. That evening, she told the twins the news. Noah jumped around the room shouting that he would finally have his own bed. Lily asked if she could paint her walls purple. Emma laughed through tears, hugging them tightly. For the first time in months, their future didn't look like one long stretch of uncertainty. She called Gabriel afterward, her voice trembling with happiness as she shared the news. He laughed in relief on the other end. "I'm so happy for you," he said sincerely. "You deserve this." Move-in day came with borrowed boxes and the help of volunteers from the foundation. The townhouse wasn't large or luxurious, but to Emma it felt like a palace. Clean floors, functioning appliances, and bedrooms with real doors that closed. She let the twins choose their room preferences, watching their excitement bounce off the walls. When the last box was set down and the volunteers left, Emma stood in the empty living room and simply breathed. This was the home she had dreamed of, built not of extravagance, but of safety and stability. Gabriel stopped by with Denise later that afternoon for a routine welcome visit. He kept his appearance simple, no entourage, just genuine presence. Seeing the twins racing across the small yard out back filled him with an emotion he hadn't expected: peace. Emma thanked both of them again, but Gabriel shook his head gently. "You did the hard part," he reminded her. "This is your victory." As they spoke, Sophie and Lucas waited quietly in the car. Gabriel had brought them along but hesitated to introduce them, uncertain how to bridge this new chapter respectfully. Emma noticed the children sitting patiently inside and smiled. "Are those your kids?" she asked. Gabriel nodded. "They are." "I didn't know if it was appropriate to." Emma's answer came easily. "They're welcome to come say hello, if they'd like," she offered. He raised an eyebrow in slight surprise, then waved them over. The 4 children met awkwardly at first, then found common ground through a shared love of drawing and spontaneous games in the yard. Their laughter echoed against the townhouse walls, creating a sound Emma hadn't heard in a very long time, joy unshadowed by worry. As the adults watched, something unspoken settled into the space between Emma and Gabriel. It wasn't romance yet, nor a promise of anything more than what they already shared. But it was deep, steady, and undeniably warm. 2 parents who had arrived at very different places in life discovered they stood on similar emotional ground. For the first time, both allowed themselves to imagine not just surviving the future, but shaping it together, however slowly, however cautiously it might unfold. Time moved gently after the move, no longer racing forward in survival mode. Emma's life settled into a new rhythm shaped by school drop-offs, part-time work at a nearby bakery, and evenings spent building ordinary routines that once felt impossibly distant. The townhouse became a true home quickly, its walls filling with taped drawings, family photos, and paper crafts from school projects. Noah learned how to ride his bike on the quiet street out front, while Lily transformed her bedroom into a sea of purple and glitter, exactly as she'd hoped. Emma often stood in the doorway watching them, hardly believing the peace now wrapped around their days. Gabriel began visiting more often, though always announced, always respectful of the boundaries between their worlds. Sometimes he came with his children, other times alone to check in or share coffee at the small kitchen table. He dressed more casually now when he visited, jeans instead of tailored suits, a sweater instead of a crisp blazer. In those moments, stripped of the symbols of his wealth, he seemed lighter, more genuine. Emma noticed how he relaxed when the kids were around, how laughter softened the lines of weariness on his face. Watching him learn to toss a ball with Noah or kneel patiently beside Lily's coloring book stirred something quiet inside her. One Saturday, all 4 children were sprawled on the living room floor building an elaborate cardboard city when Gabriel and Emma found themselves alone at the table again. Steam curled from their coffee mugs, and for a moment neither spoke. The comfortable silence surprised them both. "This feels normal," Gabriel finally said, a note of wonder in his voice. Emma nodded. "I forgot what that felt like," she replied softly. She didn't mention how normality used to seem so unattainable it hurt to even imagine. Their conversations began to deepen naturally. They spoke of grief. Emma shared memories of her late partner, the twins' father, lost suddenly to illness years earlier. Gabriel spoke of losing his wife to a car accident, the way the world had gone quiet afterward despite all the noise around him. Tears were shed in the quiet of that small kitchen, but they weren't heavy tears anymore. They were cleansing, shared, understood. Each story told stitched a stronger thread between them, binding 2 broken paths into something steadier. Neither rushed anything that resembled romance. They were careful, sensitive to their children, to the delicate trust forming between them. Affection grew in small gestures, a hand lingering when passing a cup, a reassuring touch on the shoulder when one spoke of a fear. Emma found herself waiting for Gabriel's visits without anxiety, only gentle anticipation. Gabriel noticed how her laugh had become more frequent, brighter than before, and how his own evenings felt hollow without those shared moments. Their connection didn't blaze suddenly, it warmed slowly, like a hearth that quietly fills a room with light. One evening after dinner, while the children painted in the backyard, Gabriel admitted something that had been building behind his eyes. "For a long time," he said, staring at the wooden fence instead of her, "I thought providing everything financially meant I was doing my job as a parent. But watching you with your kids, I see how much I've been missing." Emma responded with compassion rather than judgment. "We all do the best we know how at the time," she said. "What matters is realizing we can do better." Her words landed like absolution he never knew he needed. Over the following months, the children became inseparable. Sophie and Lucas joined Noah and Lily on scooter rides, indoor campouts, and weekend picnics at the park by the townhouse. They learned each other's routines, habits, and humor. Where awkwardness once lived, now grew companionship. Teachers remarked how confident the twins appeared. Sophie began talking more openly at school. Lucas grew visibly more relaxed, laughing easily in ways Emma hadn't first seen. The blending of lives happened naturally, guided not by force but by shared joy. One autumn evening, after the children were tucked into beds across 2 houses, Gabriel walked Emma to her porch. Golden light from the street lamp glowed softly against the siding. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves. They stood facing each other, something tender and unspoken swelling between them. "Emma," he began, stopping himself mid-sentence as emotion caught his throat. She looked up at him patiently, neither rushing nor retreating. "I never expected that night at the community center to change my life," he continued. "But it did. You did." Her breath hitched quietly. He reached out, hesitating inches from her hand. When she placed her fingers into his, the touch resonated like a promise neither had dared ask for yet. Their eyes met, the question passing silently between them, is this real? Can we allow ourselves this happiness? With unspoken agreement, they simply stayed together in that moment, close but unhurried, letting the answer unfold slowly instead of forcing it into words. The next morning, Emma saw Gabriel differently, not as a benefactor or a passing ally, but as someone walking beside her into an uncertain but hopeful future. Fear still lingered. What if they moved too fast? What if old wounds resurfaced? But trust grew stronger than fear. They spoke openly about moving carefully, about prioritizing their children above everything else. No promises were made yet, only commitments to honesty and presence. Weeks passed quietly. Then one night, during a shared dinner with all 6 of them squeezed around an extended table at Gabriel's house, Lily spoke up unexpectedly. "When are we going to live all together?" she asked, her voice innocent and curious. Forks paused. Eyes shifted nervously between adults. Gabriel and Emma exchanged glances, neither prepared for such a direct question. Instead of deflecting, Emma reached for Lily's hand gently. "That's something we're thinking about," she said carefully. "When everyone's ready." Lily nodded, satisfied with that simple truth. Later that night, after the children slept, Gabriel turned to Emma with quiet vulnerability. "I've been thinking about that question too," he admitted. "Not about rushing, but about what kind of family I want to build now." His voice softened almost to a whisper. "I don't want my children growing up with everything except the warmth of a real home. And I see that warmth with you." Emma's eyes filled, the weight of his sincerity settling deep within her chest. "You need a home," he continued, words tumbling slowly from the truth long forming inside him. "And I need a wife and a mother for my children." He stopped then, realizing how stark the phrase sounded, and hurried to add, "Not out of need, but out of choice." Silence hovered thick between them. Emma searched his face for any trace of desperation or convenience, finding only genuine vulnerability. Her heart pounded loud in her ears. She exhaled shakily. "That's a big thing to ask," she said softly. "And an even bigger thing to consider." Gabriel nodded, not pushing, only holding her gaze. "I know," he replied. "Take all the time you need. I just wanted to be honest." They stood together in that quiet room, not bound by certainty but by something deeper, mutual respect, shared healing, and the fragile beginning of love. Emma didn't give him an answer yet, but as she walked back to her car that night, her steps felt lighter. For the first time in years, her future looked open not just with survival, but with choice. Emma barely slept that night. Gabriel's words repeated in her mind like a gentle echo she couldn't silence. "You need a home, and I need a wife and a mother for my children." The phrase was bold, almost overwhelming, yet not heavy with pressure the way promises had felt in the past. What unsettled her most was not the size of the proposal, but how deeply she wanted the future it suggested. Still, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet breathing of Noah and Lily, reminding herself to move slowly. Hope was beautiful, but it needed patience to survive. The following days carried a thoughtful stillness between her and Gabriel. Their conversations continued as usual, warm and sincere, but neither mentioned the proposal again. They both respected the silence around it, allowing emotions to simmer without forcing resolution. Emma spent long walks at the nearby park weighing possibilities. She thought about blending households, about what stability meant for her children, and about trusting love after loss. Fear whispered of dependency and heartbreak, yet faith whispered louder. Sometimes rebuilding meant allowing someone to help carry the weight. One afternoon, after a particularly lively playdate involving grass stains and unstoppable laughter, the 6 of them sat in the park sharing ice cream cones. Watching all 4 children chase each other across the grass, Emma realized something simple and surprising. This already felt like family, even before any label existed for it. Gabriel noticed the soft smile on her face. "What are you thinking?" he asked. Emma hesitated just a beat. "That I haven't felt this peaceful in a very long time." His eyes warmed at her answer. Later that evening, once children were collected and tucked safely into beds at separate homes, Emma asked Gabriel to come sit with her on the small porch of the townhouse. The street was quiet, the hum of distant traffic wrapped in summer air. Her hands trembled slightly as she clasped them together. He sensed the weight of the moment but said nothing, waiting. Finally, she looked up and spoke. "I've thought about what you said. About the future. About us." Her voice wavered but did not stop. "I can't promise perfection. I can't promise I won't get scared sometimes. But I can promise honesty and love." She met his eyes fully now. "If we take it slowly, together, I want this." Gabriel felt emotion rush through him so suddenly that he struggled to breathe. Hope surged where long restraint had lived. He nodded carefully, not wanting to overwhelm the fragile miracle unfolding. "Slowly is perfect," he whispered. They didn't rush into a kiss or grand declaration. Instead, they leaned into each other and rested foreheads together, sharing a quiet moment of certainty. It felt far more powerful than any dramatic gesture. The blending of households began gradually. Weekend stays turned into midweek dinners, which turned into shared homework hours and bedtime stories read to all 4 children curled together on oversized couches. Conversations about logistics came next: school zones, schedules, personal boundaries, handled with maturity and mutual respect. Gabriel offered to move closer to Emma's neighborhood rather than uproot the twins yet again, surprising even himself with the ease of the decision. The glass tower downtown gave way to a warm family house near the park. With time, the children adapted seamlessly. They argued like siblings, laughed like best friends, and formed bonds that needed no prompting from seeing adults lead the way. Sophie began braiding Lily's hair each morning. Lucas taught Noah how to play chess at the kitchen table in the evenings. Emma noticed how Gabriel's parenting style softened: more hugs, less structure, while she herself learned to lean on someone else without guilt or fear. Love was reshaping both of them gently. Months later, on a quiet family walk along the lakeshore, Gabriel stopped suddenly. The kids raced ahead, distracted by skipping stones and chasing gulls. He reached into his pocket and turned to Emma, heart pounding. There was no public display, no audience, only the sound of water and laughter in the distance. "Emma," he said softly, stepping closer, "you turned my house into a home. You gave my children warmth again. And you gave me something I thought I had lost forever." He opened a small velvet box, revealing a simple ring, elegant but unpretentious, just like their love. "Will you marry me?" Emma's breath caught. Tears blurred her vision as she nodded vigorously. "Yes," she whispered, unable to find other words. Gabriel slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands before pulling her into a gentle embrace. The children noticed at once and came running back, excitement erupting when they realized what had happened. "Does this mean we're really a family now?" Noah asked wide-eyed. Emma knelt to hold them all close. "Yes," she said, voice thick with emotion. "It means we already were, and now we're choosing it forever." Their wedding months later was small, intimate, and filled with laughter. The children stood proudly beside them, beaming witnesses to a love born not of fantasy but of resilience and grace. Far from the luxury galas and high society events Gabriel once navigated, this celebration took place in the same community center where their story had begun. Friends from the foundation volunteered flowers and decorations. Denise cried openly throughout the ceremony. The place shimmered not with wealth, but with warmth. Years passed quietly and beautifully. The merged family grew stronger through ordinary challenges: school projects, scraped knees, late-night talks, and shared dreams. The townhouse and nearby family home remained full of music, chatter, and the gentle chaos of love. Gabriel continued his housing initiatives with renewed purpose, driven now by real faces instead of abstract goals. Emma returned to school part-time, eventually becoming a counselor specializing in family housing transition, helping others cross the very bridge she once walked. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, they sat together on the porch watching the children play in the fading light. Gabriel would reach for Emma's hand and whisper the words that had once changed everything: "You needed a home, and I needed a wife and a mother for my children." Emma would smile and finish the sentence for him every time. "We both needed a family."